Inside the St. Martin's shelter on Endell Street, 150 homeless people filed through the entrance, bewildered by what they saw. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling of what was normally a bare community hall. White tablecloths covered every surface. The scent of roasted turkey and fresh bread filled the air. Most of these people hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks, and suddenly they were walking into something that looked like a royal banquet. What none of them knew was that the man refilling their water glasses, dressed in a simple black waiter's uniform with his face partially obscured by thick-rimmed glasses and a service cap, was Freddie Mercury. The biggest rock star in Britain was serving them dinner, and not a single person had recognized him. Freddie had planned this moment for 3 months. After Live Aid the previous year, where Queen had commanded the world stage and raised millions for famine relief, something had shifted inside him. The applause of 72,000 people at Wembley had felt hollow when he returned to his empty mansion in Kensington. He had everything, yet somehow that meant he had nothing that truly mattered. So he had called his accountant with an unusual request. He wanted to rent the largest homeless shelter in London for New Year's Eve, hire professional chefs, and host a feast. But there was one absolute condition. Nobody could know he was funding it, and he would serve the food himself. His manager had called it madness. His bandmates had expressed concern about safety, but Freddie was unmovable. He needed to do something real, something that mattered beyond platinum records and sold-out stadiums. Now moving between tables with a water pitcher, Freddie watched the faces around him. These weren't statistics or charity cases. They were human beings who had fallen through society's cracks, each carrying stories of loss and survival that humbled him completely. At table 7, near the back of the hall, sat Rose Patterson. She was 68 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun and eyes that had seen too much sadness. She wore 3 sweaters layered on top of each other, all of them threadbare and stained. On her lap sat a tattered photograph in a plastic sleeve, which she kept touching every few minutes as if to confirm it was still there. Freddie noticed her immediately. While everyone else was eating with desperate hunger, shoving food into their mouths as if afraid it might disappear, Rose was crying silently. Tears ran down her weathered cheeks and dropped onto her untouched plate of turkey and vegetables. He approached her table slowly, the water pitcher still in his hands. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, keeping his voice slightly lower than his natural register. "Is everything all right with your meal?" Rose looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "The food is beautiful, son. I just haven't had the heart to eat it." Freddie set down the pitcher and pulled out the chair across from her without asking permission. Something about this woman's profound sadness drew him in. "Would you like to talk about it?" Rose studied his face for a moment. There was something familiar about this waiter's eyes, something warm and genuine that made her want to trust him. She held up the photograph. It showed a young man, maybe 25 years old, with dark hair and a bright smile. "My son, Thomas. I haven't seen him in 8 months." "What happened to him?" Freddie asked gently. "Heroin happened to him." Rose's voice cracked. "He was a good boy. Worked as a mechanic, had a girlfriend, had dreams. Then he got injured at work, got prescribed painkillers, and within a year he was on the streets chasing the next fix. I've looked for him every single day. I walk miles through London, checking every corner, every squat, every place I think he might be. But it's like he vanished into thin air." Freddie felt something break open inside his chest. He had watched friends disappear into addiction. He had seen talented musicians throw away everything for the temporary escape of drugs. He knew exactly how this story usually ended. "Do you know what area he was last seen?" he asked. Rose pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her coat pocket. It had an address scrawled on it in shaky handwriting. "A man at the soup kitchen on Gerrard Street said he saw Thomas near King's Cross 2 weeks ago. But when I went there, nobody knew anything." Freddie memorized the address. He didn't know why, but he felt a sudden, overwhelming need to help this woman find her son. Not because it would make a good story, or because it would ease his guilt about his own wealth, but because Rose's love for Thomas reminded him of his own mother's unconditional devotion, the way she had never stopped believing in Farrokh Bulsara, even when he had transformed himself into someone completely different. I'm going to help you find him, Freddie said quietly. Rose shook her head. That's very kind, but you don't understand. I've tried everything. The police don't care about addicts. The hospitals have no record of him. It's like my son doesn't exist anymore. He exists, Freddie said with sudden intensity, and tonight we're going to find him. Before Rose could respond, Freddie stood up and walked quickly toward the kitchen area where the shelter's director, a practical woman named Margaret Collins, was coordinating the serving staff. Margaret, Freddie said, pulling off his cap and glasses. I need to borrow your phone and your list of every homeless shelter, squat, and known gathering spot within 5 miles of King's Cross. Margaret stared at him, finally recognizing who he was. Mr. Mercury, you're supposed to be here for the dinner service, not running around London in the middle of the night. The dinner will continue without me for a few hours, Freddie replied, already pulling on his coat. But there's a woman out there whose son is missing, and I have the resources to find him. That matters more than me serving dessert. What happened next would remain unknown to the guests at the shelter. While they continued eating, laughing, and experiencing a moment of warmth and dignity on the coldest night of the year, Freddie Mercury was racing through the streets of London in his Mercedes, a map spread across the passenger seat and a list of addresses in his hand. His first stop was a squat near King's Cross Station. He climbed 3 flights of stairs in a building that should have been condemned years ago, knocking on doors and asking anyone who answered if they knew Thomas Patterson. Most people slammed the door in his face. A few demanded money before they would talk. But Freddie kept going, driven by the image of Rose's devastated face and that worn photograph she clutched like a lifeline. At the 4th location, a homeless encampment under a railway bridge, Freddie found someone who recognized Thomas's description. Yeah, I know Tommy. Skinny guy, always talking about his mom. He's been staying at the old warehouse on Caledonian Road, but he's in bad shape, man. Real bad. Freddie drove to Caledonian Road with his heart pounding. The warehouse was an abandoned factory building, its windows broken and its walls covered in graffiti. He pushed through a broken door and found himself in a vast space filled with mattresses, sleeping bags, and the distinctive smell of desperation and decay. There were perhaps 30 people scattered throughout the space, most of them unconscious, or too high to notice his presence. Freddie moved carefully through the darkness, shining a small flashlight from face to face, comparing them to the mental image of Thomas from Rose's photograph. Then he saw him. In the far corner, curled up on a filthy mattress, was a young man who matched the photograph. He had lost significant weight, his skin was covered in sores, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. But the bone structure of his face, the shape of his nose, the curve of his mouth, it was unmistakably Rose's son. Thomas? Freddie knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Thomas Patterson? The young man's eyes opened slightly. They were unfocused, pupils dilated. Who are you? He mumbled. A friend of your mother's. She's been looking for you, Thomas. She hasn't given up on you. At the mention of his mother, something flickered in Thomas's eyes. A moment of clarity breaking through the fog of addiction. My mom? Is she okay? She's worried sick about you, Freddie said firmly, but she's alive, and she loves you, and she wants you to come home. I can't go home, Thomas said, tears beginning to stream down his face. Look at me. I'm disgusting. I'm a junkie. She deserves better than a son like me. Freddie grabbed Thomas's face with both hands, forcing the young man to look at him. Listen to me very carefully. Your mother doesn't care what you've become. She cares that you're alive. She carries your photograph everywhere she goes. She walks the streets looking for you every single day. You are not beyond saving, but you need to choose to be saved. Right now, tonight, something in Freddie's voice and the intensity of his conviction cut through Thomas's despair. I don't have money for rehab. I don't have insurance. I don't have anything. You don't need money, Freddie said. I'm going to take care of everything. But you need to come with me now, before you change your mind or before the drugs make you forget this conversation ever happened. Freddie half carried Thomas out of the warehouse and into his car. The young man was shaking, barely able to walk, his body already beginning to experience the early stages of withdrawal. But he was alive, and that was what mattered. Instead of driving back to the shelter immediately, Freddie took Thomas to a private hospital in Hampstead, where he had already arranged for an emergency admission. He had called from the car, using his fame and his money to cut through bureaucratic delays and secure immediate treatment. As medical staff took Thomas away on a stretcher, Freddie provided his credit card information and sign-in forms guaranteeing payment for a full 90-day residential treatment program. The cost would be substantial, but Freddie didn't hesitate for even a moment. By the time he returned to St. Martin's shelter, it was nearly midnight. The dinner was winding down, and guests were beginning to prepare for the evening's final surprise. Margaret had informed everyone that there would be live music to welcome the new year, though she hadn't revealed who would be performing. Freddie found Rose still sitting at table 7, still holding Thomas's photograph, still crying quietly. He pulled up the chair beside her and took her hand gently. "I found your son," he said simply. Rose's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What? You found Thomas? Where is he? Is he alive?" "He's alive and he's safe. I took him to a hospital where they're going to help him get clean. The treatment is already paid for. All you need to do is visit him tomorrow at Hampstead Medical Center, and they'll explain everything." Rose stared at Freddie in complete shock, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Then suddenly she looked at him more carefully, really looked at him for the first time. The shape of his face, the distinctive overbite, the warm brown eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're Freddie Mercury." Freddie smiled that famous smile. "Guilty as charged, darling. But that's not important right now. What's important is that Thomas has a chance to get his life back. And you have your son back." Rose threw her arms around Freddie and sobbed into his shoulder. "Thank you. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. You've given me my son back. You've given me hope." Freddie held her tightly, his own eyes wet with tears. "Thank your own love, Rose. I just had a car and some resources. You're the one who never stopped searching, never stopped believing. That's the real power here." At precisely midnight, as fireworks exploded over London and the guests at the shelter counted down to the new year, Freddie Mercury walked onto the small stage that had been set up at the front of the hall. There was no elaborate lighting, no backup singers, no Brian May guitar solo, just Freddie, a piano, and a microphone. When the guests recognized who was standing before them, the reaction was explosive. People screamed, cried, jumped to their feet in disbelief. The man who had been serving them dinner all evening was one of the most famous musicians in the world. "Happy New Year, my darlings," Freddie said into the microphone, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "I know this has been an unusual evening, but I wanted to share this night with you because you've reminded me of something I had forgotten. That the most valuable thing any of us can offer the world isn't fame or money or talent. It's compassion. It's seeing another human being who needs help and deciding that their life matters just as much as our own." He began to play the opening chords of "These Are the Days of Our Lives" on the piano. His voice, that remarkable instrument that had sold millions of records and filled stadiums around the world, now filled a homeless shelter with music that spoke of memory, regret, and the precious fleeting nature of human existence. People in the audience wept openly, not because they were in the presence of a celebrity, but because they felt seen. For one night, they weren't invisible. For one night, someone with power and privilege had chosen to sit at their tables, serve their food, and recognize their humanity. When the song ended, Freddie looked directly at Rose, who was standing near the front with tears streaming down her face. "This next song," he said, "is for every parent who has ever lost a child and refused to give up hope. For every mother who walks the streets searching for someone she loves. This is love of my life." The performance that followed was later described by those present as one of the most moving musical moments they had ever experienced. Freddie sang with raw emotion, his voice breaking on certain phrases, his hands trembling on the piano keys. This wasn't a polished stadium performance. This was something deeper and more real. Rose would later say that in that moment, she understood something profound about the nature of fame and success. The man on that stage had everything the world could offer, but he had chosen to spend New Year's Eve serving dinner to people society had forgotten. That choice, that deliberate act of humility and service, revealed more about his character than any song or concert ever could. For 24 years, the story of that New Year's Eve remained largely unknown. The guests at the shelter told their friends and family, But most people dismissed it as an impossible fantasy. Freddie Mercury serving dinner at a homeless shelter? It sounded like wishful thinking or urban legend. But in 2010, Margaret Collins, the shelter director, was interviewed for a BBC documentary about charitable work by celebrities. When the interviewer asked if she had any memorable experiences, Margaret smiled and said, "I have a story that nobody has ever believed, but it's absolutely true." She told the story of December 31st, 1986. She showed photographs that had been taken that night, images of Freddie in his waiter's uniform, of him singing on the small stage, of him embracing Rose Patterson. The documentary segment went viral, shared millions of times across social media, with people marveling at Freddie's secret generosity. Thomas Patterson, now 58 years old and 24 years sober, appeared on camera to share his own perspective. "Freddie Mercury saved my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just because he found me and paid for my treatment, but because he showed me that someone I had never met believed I was worth saving. When you're an addict living on the streets, society treats you like garbage. But Freddie looked at me and saw a human being who deserved another chance. That changed everything." Rose had passed away in 2005, but Thomas shared the journal she had kept. In it, she had written about that night in meticulous detail, describing every conversation, every moment, every note of Freddie's performance. On the final page, in her shaky handwriting, she had written, "Tonight I learned that angels walk among us, and sometimes they look like rock stars." The revelation of Freddie's New Year's Eve feast sparked a movement. Other celebrities began organizing similar events, trying to recreate the spirit of what Freddie had done. But those who had been present at St. Martin's Shelter in 1986 always said the same thing. It wasn't about the money or the famous name. It was about the genuine human connection, the willingness to serve rather than be served, the choice to spend the most celebrated night of the year with society's most marginalized people.